What we do know is that it's big, it will probably be able to strike targets with precise munitions, it's probably going to have a long range as well as powerful sensors, and it's very stealthy. That indicates a design intended to strike deep behind enemy lines where infrastructure is far more vulnerable. If you make the assumption that China will be fighting against the US Navy and the US Air Force in these skies, two incredible logistical organizations that moonlight in blowing things up, then the whole picture starts to come together. The J-36 doesn't have to be able to kill an F-35, but what it can do is use that range and extended striking capability to hit those key logistical targets. We're talking military bases, airstrips, radar stations, comms equipment, power generation hubs, command and control aircraft, maritime control aircraft, fuel tankers, and other command or surveillance platforms. You disrupt that part of the US military, you push those tankers further and further back, and it limits the range that the entire force can operate at. Logistics is everything in warfare, and fighters have further to travel, less fuel available.
大家好，这里是嘎人四绝频道。刚才的精彩集锦已经把 J-36最令人警惕也最值得关注的特点讲得很清楚了。它未必需要在空中击败 F-35，却可能凭借超远航程、强大感测器和出色匿踪能力，直接深入敌后，攻击机场、雷达站、通信设施。指挥平台和空中加油机，说到底，现代战争拼的不只是战斗机之间谁更灵活，更是整套后勤和作战体系谁先撑不住。这样一架体型巨大、采用无尾布局，甚至安装3具引擎的神秘飞机，究竟是战斗机、轰炸机，还是一种全新的远程制空与打击平台？答案目前仍然充满未知，但它不断试飞、持续改进的速度，已经足以让整个航空界认真对待。更有意思的是，中国还在同步推进体型更小的 J-50，而美国的 F-47依旧笼罩在高度保密之中。今天这期视频，我们就来拆解 J-36的独特设计、真实任务，以及它和美国6代机之间究竟有没有资格被称为太平洋上空的下一场对决。
3 engines. So that's all the production news that we've had up until this point. A decent bit to chew on if you get into the weeds. But questions remain about the airframe itself. Just what the heck is China building? Because, in all honesty, the J-36 is one of the more bizarre designs we've ever seen coming out of a serious jet program. So, what can we glean from the information that we've got about this spooky military Dorito? So probably the most striking thing about the early images of the J-36 is that whilst we don't know official dimensions, as none have been reported, and any source claiming numbers as definitive is lying to you, the J-36 is huge. The satellite analysis at Lop Nor put the J-36 at roughly 62 feet long. That's about 19 meters, which is about as long as a bowling lane, by the way. Meanwhile, expert aerospace analyst Bill Sweetman placed the aircraft at an estimated length of around 23 meters or 75 feet, about the length of a slightly longer bowling lane, we guess. So let's just treat the established length as between those two numbers as an estimate. Either way, for a jet, that is really, really big. For reference, if you want something more useful than bowling lanes, the F-35 is just over 51 feet long, or around 15.6 meters. Sweetman also estimated the fully loaded aircraft could weigh around 120,000 pounds. That's around 54 tons. Again, that's an estimate rather than an official takeoff weight or maximum operational weight. But no matter which way you slice it, if the J-36 does turn out to be officially that big and that heavy, this thing is going to have more beef than my local Chinese takeaway. It is simply exceptionally large for a tactical combat aircraft, with corresponding substantial internal volume to boot. The tandem landing gear on earlier prototypes showcase just how heavy this thing may well be. The visible bay geometry that we can see reinforces that too. The J-36 appears to have one very large central bay, flanked by 2 smaller ones, leaving plausible space for both large standoff weapons as well as shorter-range air-to-air missiles. I wouldn't leave anything off the table for this. Laser-guided gliding bombs, massive missiles, giant genetically engineered laser scorpions, or whatever else the Chinese have copied off of someone else that week. Who would they copy the laser scorpions off? Australia? There appears to be enough space for multiple crew. Jane's analysis assessed what appeared to be side-by-side seating for 2 crew, as well as visible electro-optical sensor apertures around the nose. This gives us a clue about mission workload and ambition for what the J-36 might be trying to achieve, though we can only guess. We just don't know. 2 crew members might indicate a pilot and a weapons specialist. Could be for electronic warfare, communications, or even control over loyal wingmen or small drone swarms. Whatever it is, it's probably going to be f***ing cool. Actual weapons load by weight, fuel capacity, and range remain unknown, but you'd expect all to be pretty substantial given the sheer size of this thing. And then there's the wings. The tailless arrangement had those in China referring to it as the ginkgo leaf, and whilst that's a remarkably accurate comparison, the murder Dorito just sounds better. Regardless, this layout is down to 2 things: stealth and stability. A plane that has conventional vertical tail fins like the F-22 Raptor, for example, provides a trade-off. You get stability and it's easier to control, but it comes at the cost of stealth. The risk is that those vertical fins are a really nice flat surface that a radar signal would just love to bounce off of, revealing the location of the aircraft. And that's fine when you have a jet like the F-22 that is armed to the teeth and faster than God, probably. But when your priority is stealth, it's easier to just not be seen at all. Removing them is also a trade-off in the other direction. Flying a tailless airframe at Mach level way too fast forces more of the flying work to be done by computers, distributed control surfaces, and propulsion. And that's not a bad thing by any means, but it makes for a more complex, expensive aircraft with more complicated components and therefore more required maintenance. But what you get for that complexity is a lot in return. Aerodynamic efficiency, reduced drag at high speeds, and much greater stealth capabilities. In such configurations, it is also likely to cost the J-36 some maneuverability. That's not to say the J-36 has the turning circle of an aircraft carrier that had a big lunch. Earlier iterations of the J-36 had trailing edge control segments on both wings to help with yaw control, and public footage has shown meaningful maneuverability, ensuring that it won't be a sitting duck in a dogfight. Later prototypes seem to indicate thrust vectoring as well as footage and images of the aircraft in a steep angled climb. What this tells us is that Chengdu has created an aircraft that can turn. It doesn't tell us about combat performance, energy retention, angle of attack, the number of Gs the pilots will face. It doesn't tell us basically anything about actual agility in combat situations. They could also offer massive electrical generation capacity for sensors and electronic warfare, which, given that this is a 6th-gen jet, you would expect it to have. It could also just be to have capacity for greater thrust at higher altitudes and even higher speeds. Until we see the full design specs, we can't be certain. It does, however, make the J-36 look like a bloody spaceship, and that's something we can all agree on. Some people have indicated that 3 engines could allow for greater range, although the logic here is a bit flawed. If you replace one car engine with 2, it doesn't magically make the gas tank bigger. 3 engines just means greater fuel consumption and power. They also mean more moving parts, heat, and maintenance hours for the poor engineers who have to work out how to keep the bloody thing in the air. The massive body might allow for a larger fuel tank, and that's a plausible way to infer greater range. But that has nothing to do with the number of engines. The large wing suggests this to a lesser degree, combined with the low drag configuration, as well as the cruise profile of the jet itself. One thing's for sure though, it's going to be fast, with analyst assessments focusing on sustaining speed for long periods, which we can infer may well mean high-altitude operations and supercruise capabilities, but that is speculation for the most part. We've also seen claims that the J-36 is designed to work in lockstep with China's emerging carrier fleet, in particular with the newest commissioned vessel, the Type 003 Fujian. This is, to put it mildly, nonsense. A 2025 Chinese technical paper did study precision carrier landing control for tailless flying wing aircraft using fancy technology. One of its authors, Cheng Gang Tao, happens to also be independently listed with the Chengdu Aircraft Design Institute. But the paper makes no reference to the J-36 nor the Fujian. It concerns a much smaller, generic aircraft configuration. Sure, it could happen in the future. With 6th-gen aircraft, you can't rule anything out. But for now, such claims are a bit like seeing an elephant on the television and concluding that there must be a herd of them in your living room. The logic has taken such a jump that even Mao would have been impressed with such a great leap forward. Ching. Pacific Showdown. So, an important question arises from all of this. What exactly is the J-36 trying to be? What is this slightly bizarre design from Chengdu trying to achieve on the battlefield? Well, in tune with the motto of this video, you could do it, I don't need to do it. Is it a fighter? It's far too large for that, unless it plans to be the biggest multi-role stealth fighter to ever exist, and by some distance. It just doesn't really fit the profile. But it seems far too maneuverable and fighter-like to be considered a bomber either. The answer is frustratingly both, but also neither. I'll explain. From open source interpretations, the closest idea to what feels right is that the J-36 is intended to be a very long-range air dominance platform with separate strike and command capabilities. Now, that might sound like it's trying to be all things to all people, but hear us out. It seems like it's set to be stealthy enough to operate deep into enemy territory. It's definitely large enough to carry both substantial fuel and weapons, and it's likely to be set to be equipped to contribute to long-range strikes. In that sense, putting the labels of fighter or bomber on the J-36 seems inappropriate, at least for now. The design itself has some ideological overlap with China's long-rumoured JHXX regional stealth strike platform, and whilst there is no evidence that establishes both aircraft as part of the same program, the similarities conceptually are there. That might be why the J-36 refuses to conform to almost any established norms and neat categories, like an emo kid yelling at their parents about society or some shit like that. The two-person configuration then fits that idea a little better than it would with just a single pilot. A second crew member can handle all of the extra stuff that is mission-specific, whilst the pilot ensures that it doesn't become the most expensive possible version of a Chinese firecracker. Whether that's electronic warfare, targeting, handling sensors, command and communication with other assets, you name it, this thing will probably be capable of having a whole human being entirely devoted to it. Manned-unmanned pairings are regarded by the PLA as the defining feature of future air combat. It's a fairly new concept, but official Chinese material has also stated that the two-seated J-20S can team up with its robot counterparts. People much smarter than both you and me are in the midst of working out how pilots are actually going to do that, but pulling it off will change aerial warfare forever. The Pentagon similarly agrees that guiding uncrewed aircraft is among the likely missions of Chinese sixth-generation systems. Far be it from me to accept the US government's take on anything, but the Pentagon is often more right about this stuff than wrong, and they have access to a lot more information about these programs than a bald dude on YouTube and his team of basement-enslaved writers. So then, what is this plane designed to do? Well, clearly, a whole bunch of stuff, but a few of its design features and some context of the real world might give us more clues than you might expect. What we do know is that it's big, it will probably be able to strike targets with precise munitions, it's probably going to have a long range as well as powerful sensors, and it's very stealthy. That indicates a design intended to strike deep behind enemy lines where infrastructure is far more vulnerable. If you make the assumption that China will be fighting against the US Navy and the US Air Force in these skies, two incredible logistical organizations that moonlight in blowing things up, then the whole picture starts to come together. The J-36 doesn't have to be able to kill an F-35, but what it can do is use that range and extended striking capability to hit those key logistical targets. We're talking military bases, airstrips, radar stations, comms equipment, power generation hubs, command and control aircraft, maritime control aircraft, fuel tankers, and other command or surveillance platforms. You disrupt that part of the US military, you push those tankers further and further back, and it limits the range that the entire force can operate at. Logistics is everything in warfare, and fighters have further to travel, less fuel available, and more.
看到这里，我们或许已经能够回答一个问题：这架被外界称为 J-36的神秘飞机究竟意味着什么？答案恐怕不是中国已经凭借一架新飞机立刻赢下了第6代军备竞赛，也不是美国的空中优势从此土崩瓦解。真正值得关注的是一场围绕未来战争形态的竞争。已经从概念和图纸进入了原型机不断试飞、反复修改、持续验证的阶段。J-36最吸引眼球的地方当然是它巨大的无尾机身、菱形三角翼以及极不寻常的3具引擎，但外形这是最容易被看见的部分，真正决定一架飞机价值的却是隐藏在机体内部的系统能力。它的传感器能不能在复杂电磁环境下稳定发现目标？软件能不能把来自不同平台的信息快速融合？数据链能不能让它与无人机、卫星、预警机和其他战斗机协同作战？电子战设备能不能压制对手？这些才是第6代战机与上一代战机之间真正的差距。从目前的公开影像来看，程度方面正在快速推进多个原型机版本。机鼻、进气道、排气喷口和起落架不断调整，说明设计仍在试验和取舍之中。有人把这种变化解读为中国已经接近量产，也有人把它当成美国空军即将失去优势的证据。 但更稳妥的判断是，这些变化首先说明研发项目活跃，工程团队正在验证不同方案。原型机飞起来并不等于作战系统成熟，能够短时间升空，也不等于能够长期可靠地执行高强度任务。这也是我们在面对军事新闻时必须反复提醒自己的地方。照片可以证明一架飞机存在，视频可以证明它能够飞行，却无法直接证明它的雷达性能、隐身水平、发动机寿命、武器兼容性和实际航程，更无法仅凭一次爬升、一次转弯就判断它在真实空战中的能量保持能力和机动性能。把有限证据扩展成确定结论，听起来很刺激，却很容易把分析变成宣传。J-36采用3具引擎，也提供了一个观察军事工程的好角度。3具引擎可能带来更大的推力、更强的供电能力、更高的任务冗余，也可能支持更复杂的传感器和电子战设备。但与此同时，它也会增加重量、油耗、热信号、维护难度和制造成本。任何设计都不是凭空获得优势，而是在不同需求之间进行交换。无尾布局可能提升隐身和高速飞行效率，却把更多操控任务交给飞控系统和推力矢量控制。体型巨大可以容纳更多燃油和武器，却也意味着更高的后勤压力和更复杂的生产要求。所以 J-36 可能并不是传统意义上只负责格斗的战斗机，也不是单纯携带炸弹深入敌后的轰炸机。它更像一种远程空中作战平台，既要承担制空任务，也可能执行远程打击、电子战、目标指示和空中指挥。它真正瞄准的也许不是与 F-35进行近距离缠斗，而是利用航程、隐身和传感器优势去威胁机场、雷达站、通信节点、指挥机、加油机以及其他关键后勤目标。这背后反映的是现代战争越来越清晰的一条规律。战争不只是飞机对飞机、导弹对导弹，更是体系对体系、链条对链条。只要能够迫使对手的加油机后撤，让预警机远离前线，让机场和通信枢纽承受持续威胁，前线战斗机的作战半径和制空时间就会被压缩。很多时候，决定战场结果的并不是谁在空中击落了多少架飞机，而是谁先让对方无法有效组织、补给和持续作战。与 J-36同步推进的另一种新型飞机，也说明中国可能并不打算依靠单一平台解决所有问题。大型远程平台负责穿透、感知、指挥和打击，体型较小的战机负责执行更加灵活的任务，两者在于无人作战平台协同，这种组合才可能构成未来空战的核心。第6代战机的竞争最终比拼的不会只是某一架飞机的速度，而是有人机、无人机、导弹、卫星和地面系统之间能否形成高效的作战网络。至于 J-36和美国 F-47谁更强，现在几乎没有可靠答案。中国选择让部分原型机在公开环境中试飞，美国则长期把关键项目隐藏在高度保密的测试体系里。看得见不代表发展得更快，看不见也不代表没有进展。美国在2019年和2022年就曾完成相关实验原型机的飞行测试，后来才公布 F-47项目，因此不能简单的用谁先出现在卫星照片里来判断谁已经取得技术领先。真正值得比较的是双方能否把原型机变成完整、可靠、可维护、可大规模部署的作战系统，发动机是否成熟，工业供应链是否稳定，飞行员和地勤人员是否得到充分训练，数据链是否经得起实战考验，武器库存和维修保障是否跟得上。这些问题往往比一架飞机看起来有多么先进更加重要，毕竟能够制造一架外形前卫、可以升空的飞机和能够让它在真实战争中持续执行任务是完全不同的两件事。因此，面对 J-36，我们既没有必要轻视，也没有必要恐慌。它不是虚构的幻影，而是一项正在快速推进、具有明确战略意图的重大工程。但它也远未完成从原型机到成熟装备的全部跨越。未来几年，发动机型号、武器测试、传感器表现、协同作战能力和量产节奏才会逐步揭开答案。这场竞争真正带来的启示是，未来的空中优势不会属于最会制造话题的一方，而会属于能够把技术、工业、训练、情报、后勤和战略目标整合起来的一方。J-36最终会成为改变规则的新平台，还是停留在漫长试验中的大胆尝试，还需要更多证据来判断。现在最诚实的结论依然是那句话，我们还不知道。但正因为答案尚未确定，接下来的每一次试飞 每一项测试和每一个公开细节才值得我们持续观察。你认为 J-36最可能承担什么任务？它会成为远程制空平台、打击平台，还是未来有人机协同体系中的核心节点？欢迎在评论区留下你的判断，也欢迎点赞订阅，继续观看更多精彩视频。